One of the biggest wide receiver versus cornerback matchups happened in Week 11, when the Las Vegas Raiders traveled to Denver. Davante Adams faced off against Patrick Surtain. This battle is one that I thought would have been back and forth. While everyone knows that Adams is one of the top receivers in the NFL, Surtain has quickly established himself as one of the best DBs too. In just his second year out of Alabama, he's already playing like a top 10 corner and was having a dominant season up to this point. According to ProFootballFocus, Surtain had the second lowest yards allowed per coverage snap through the first 10 weeks of the year. He was allowing just 0.4 yards per coverage snap when the average is almost triple this number. Needless to say, with Surtain covering Adams in this one, I expected this battle to be a good test for both sides. Oh boy, was I wrong. Before we begin, if you can do me a huge favor and like and subscribe to my channel, I would greatly appreciate it. So anyways, I wanted to start by talking about the Broncos defense. From a scheme standpoint, Denver is mainly a cover 3 and cover 6 team. Combined together, the Broncos play these two coverages over 50% of their snaps. When they don't play these two coverages, they call it a mixture of cover 1 man with a single high safety, then they'll also play a bit of quarters coverage too. One note about this scheme is that Patrick Surtain doesn't line up in the slot. He pretty much only lines up as the outside cornerback on both sides of the field, regardless of the alignment of the offense. Davante Adams, on the other hand, he will line up outside on roughly 80% of his snaps, and he'll move inside to the slot on the other 20. This probably doesn't need to be said, but whenever Adams moved inside in this game, Surtain wasn't responsible. This is just the fact that the Broncos call so much zone coverage. They want to be flexible in their play calls, and they don't want to tip their hand to the offense by shifting around to match a specific player. This is very common in today's NFL defenses, so for them, it's not about matching star-on-star power. An example of this can be seen in the second quarter. Adams and Surtain were lining up across from each other before the snap. Due to the zone coverage by the defense, Surtain passed off Adams' route and ordered help on deep over. This is a great defensive call to help out in the post-over combination. The post-over, or the Yankee concept, is extremely dangerous against cover 3 defenses. Instead of one of the cornerbacks covering space, this will help save the safety from being isolated one-on-one. Now Carr is forced into a bad spot. He makes a very dangerous throw, and frankly, he's very lucky this wasn't picked off. Now jumping forward to one of the biggest plays in the game, I wanted to show the final game-winning touchdown to Davante Adams. I've seen a number of people ask why Surtain was so out of position. Why did he bust so hard on this assignment? Let's break down this play closely. In overtime, the Raiders were driving down the field. It was 1st and 10. The Broncos have two safeties deep. They're playing cover 6, where they're lining up the cover 4 side to the weak side and the cover 2 side to the strong side of the formation. Instead of dropping 7 into coverage, the Broncos blitz inside linebacker Josie Jewell. From an offensive perspective, the Raiders have a trips look to the right. They have 3 receivers tied to the formation, all inside the numbers. On the strong side, the Raiders are running a drag route from the outside, while Adams runs a corner. After Adams accelerates taking an inside stem, he positions his body and head to look like he's about to break back towards the left sideline. Instead of breaking inside on a dig route, which is what Surtain expected him to run here, Adams cut sharply to break back towards the right pylon. This is why Adams was wide open for this touchdown and why Surtain looked like he was completely lost on this one. As I just mentioned, Surtain was expecting Adams to run a dig. The reason for this, and the reason for the aggressive attack on the potential route, is based on Surtain's film study of the Raiders. From this personnel grouping and alignment, the Raiders love running a concept called drive. Drive features a drag route from the outside just like you saw here, and it features Adams running a dig route across the field. This concept creates a high-low read for the quarterback. The drag will try to suck up the linebackers, while the dig will find space behind them. If the linebackers drop to cover the dig, then the drag would be thrown instead. Mac Hollins in this case will get the ball underneath, and his goal would be cut up the field and get as many yards as possible after the catch. Now, as I just mentioned, this is one of the Raiders' favorite concepts out of this formation. To help cover this, an adjustment defenses will make is they'll have their outside cornerback cross the field and help cover the dig. The goal here is to help the linebackers and make sure they're not out of position. This is why Surtain was driving aggressively on this route. He thought he saw a drive concept, and through the first few seconds of the play, he wasn't wrong at all. What's interesting is that the Raiders actually ran a drive concept out of this formation earlier in this game. Adams was the recipient of this play, and he caught a 23-yard pass after the linebackers left him wide open. On the game winner in overtime, Adams mirrors the same exact stem he ran here. He used the same release, he used the same footwork, and he makes this play look identical. In my opinion, this was just a great play call by the offense to take advantage of a defense that was being very aggressive in their tendencies. I give a lot of credit to Josh McDaniels, and I'm sure Surtain will remember plays like this one in the future. Before we talk more generally about this matchup, this video is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Underdog is the best and easiest place to play fantasy sports. They let you draft your fantasy dream team in minutes, and you can use that team to cash in on your knowledge. They also have pick'ems where you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. You pick between 2 and 5 players, and these entries make boring games so much more fun. Now, as a bonus to anybody that signs up using my promo code GOLD, I'll give you my fantasy cheat sheet so you can see my rankings and who I'm targeting on a week-by-week basis. For example, I entered this afternoon-only contest back in week 6, and I made $16 off this draft. It would have been so much more if MVS created any sort of fantasy points against the Bills. While that was frustrating to say the least, I drafted another team in week 7 using my rankings, and I made $10 off this entry in their beginner double up. Go ahead, sign up using my promo code GOLD, and along with my fantasy cheat sheets, Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100 in bonus cash when you make a deposit of $10 or more. Deposit $100 and get $100 free. Now back to the breakdown, I went through and hand-tracked every single snap during this game. By my count, Surtain faced Adams in man or zone coverage on 17 snaps where Adams ran a route. It would have been 18, but Adams was blocking on a screen on the other side of the field. So looking purely at those 17 routes, Adams was targeted on 7 of those snaps. Out of the 7 targets, I had Surtain responsible for 4 catches for 85 yards and for allowing 2 touchdowns. We already looked at the game winner before the break, but let's quickly look at the other touchdown. This play happened in the second quarter. It was a 1st and 10. The Broncos have a single high safety deep and they're playing cover 3. Meanwhile, the Raiders are lining up 21 personnel and run play action after the snap. The offense runs a post with Davante Adams, who was the alert read on this play, while Mac Hollins ran a hitch as a true first read with the fullback Jacob Johnson running a flat route underneath. Depending on how the defense plays Adams, Carr will check him post-snap, and then he'll quickly move on to Hollins and Johnson if he doesn't like what he sees. I want you to pay attention to the deep middle of the field safety. He's playing Adams pretty much directly over the top and just inside the numbers. This positioning is very aggressive to protect against a corner fade route up the sideline. It's possible that the Broncos are in a form of cover 6 here, and that would explain his positioning. However, given the alignment of the other defensive backs on the field, the free safety's alignment was more aggressive than I was expecting. So from Adams' perspective, he saw that alignment of the safety and he stemmed his route vertically, trying his best not to give away his intentions before the route. He did a good job of not starting his break too far inside until he was 15 yards down the field. At that point, Adams used a speed cut to break back towards the opposite side. I love how he flattened his angle to give Carr a giant throwing lane here. Many wide receivers will drift too far vertically, and this will allow the safety and trailing defender back into the play. Adams doesn't do that, and he used that initial stem to catch his first touchdown during this game. Now, in terms of how Surtain played this, he was way too aggressive with his zone technique on the outside. If it was cover 3, he needs to do a better job of bailing deep. If this was cover 6 instead, where he's on the cover 2 side, then he was very late on his jam. Regardless, his aggressiveness and how he stopped his feet not anticipating the deep route is why he was beat here. Generally speaking, Surtain allowed 2 more catches against Adams that we haven't broken down. One was a 4-yard screen that wasn't exactly his fault, and the other was a 15-yard fade down the sideline. For this one, I love how good Adams is at tracking the ball. His concentration to extend his arms and bring it in is simply amazing. What you'll notice with Adams, and maybe this play probably isn't the best example of it, is how physical and aggressive he is while the ball's in the air. He does a good job of using his body to shield the ball away from the defender, as well as using a last-second shove to separate just enough to make the catch. The other thing that Adams is really good at is how he stems the top of his routes. Adams is the king of slow releases and using variable speed change to get cleanly out of his break. Most receivers will run their stems at 90% and then will accelerate up to 100. Adams, on the other hand, he'll run his stems at 50% and then out of nowhere he'll turn on the NOS and he'll fully explode out of his break. His goal at the top of his routes is to always cut them as sharply as possible, and this is very evident on dig routes over the middle of the field. He cuts these very sharply, and he does a great job of presenting himself back to the quarterback. Now speaking of digs, this is one of Adams' favorite routes by far. Josh McDaniels has him run a dig a lot in the Raiders offense. For my tracking, Adams ran a dig or an in-breaking route on 13 of his snaps during this game. That's over 1/3 of his routes that he ran. Eventually, Surtain started breaking on them, and once again, I'm going to guess seeing all those digs is why he aggressively played that final touchdown at the end of the game. This is just a really hard route to cover, especially when Davante Adams runs them. To wrap up this video, the final thing I'll say about this matchup is that Surtain actually did a pretty good job on his other snaps while covering Adams. However, when you allow 2 touchdowns and the 85 yards that we talked about, people will reasonably only remember the big plays. For a game like this one, that's honestly all it takes. Sometimes 2 big plays are enough. I will say though that after watching Surtain closely, I don't think any less of him from what happened here. In fact, I think he's going to recover nicely next weekend. He faces off against DJ Moore and the Carolina Panthers, and I fully expect him to play well. As far as Davante Adams is concerned, the dude is on a complete tear. In his last 3 weeks, he's put up over 400 yards and 5 touchdowns, and he doesn't seem like he's slowing down. I will be very curious to see how he plays against Tariq Woolen and the Seattle Seahawks. I think that matchup will also be a fun one to look at, and hopefully it'll be a little less one-sided. Well, that's all I have for you. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to support the channel directly, feel free to follow a link to my Patreon account below. Also, you can find me on Twitter at SamuelRGold.